So we're going to start with Sarah. So Sarah Hicks is the principal conductor of Live at Orchestra Hall. She's conducted major ensembles all over the world. She's conducts everything, but she's been specializing in film music and the film score genre. Some highlights include Coco Live at the Hollywood Bowl and the orchestral underscore for Little Mermaid Live for an ABC broadcast in November of 2019, and an album with rap artist Dessa and the Minnesota Orchestra released in November 2019. Sarah, you want to add anything to that?
I guess that covers it. Yeah. All over the world doing all kinds of stuff. Generally like it. A fun fact about me is I grew up in Hawaii and I would go surfing. At high school, I would skip out. Well, when we didn't have class, I could leave campus. So I would go surfing. I was a surfer girl back in the day. Not anymore.
That's really cool. I've always wanted to try. I have a balance problem though. I'm sure I would not do very well.
It's fun. You should try it. Definitely.
Next, we have Kate Nettleman. Kate is the acting associate principal bass. She joined the Minnesota Orchestra in the fall of 2009, and she has performed extensively throughout the United States and Southeast Asia. Before her move to Minnesota, she served as principal bass of the Hong Kong Philharmonic under Ado de Wart, who was a former music director of the Minnesota Orchestra. Kate, what you got for us?
I'm really happy to be here with you guys tonight, and I'm looking forward to getting to know our guests here. And I guess I would say what I spend a lot of time doing right now is hanging out with my 4-year-old, which is a lot of fun, and practicing and spending a lot of time at home, which is different. This year's been a little different, I'm sure, for everybody
I have no
than
idea what you're talking about.
than than life was before about a year ago. So that's where I am at.
Thanks, Kate. Next up is Chuck Lazarus. He has been a member of the orchestra since 2000. He made his Carnegie Hall solo debut with the New York String Orchestra at the age of 19, while he was still a student at Juilliard. And he's soloed with dozens of orchestras and ensembles throughout North America, and has performed and taught master classes in every state. And yeah, I thought that was cool. And throughout the world. He's been a member of several of the best known brass ensembles in the world, including Canadian Brass and Dallas Brass. Chuck, fun fact.
Let's see, I guess, well, I'm excited to be here and answer any questions and maybe offer some guidance, but I guess my non-musical pursuits are trying, now that we're teaching our 10-year-old son a little differently, doing some homeschooling and trying to keep up with 4th grade math, which I'm barely doing. And I like learning new things. So I've been learning to cross-country ski, which I now, after about 2 weeks, can do with only minimal falling down hills. So I'm getting better at that. I've been doing it every day. And I'm also trying to teach my cat to sing. And so far, I will have video proof of this that I'm going to post. My cat will actually match pitches on the piano.
Yeah,
I can prove it.
You showed us that video, or that was a pretty good. That was pretty good finding the root of the chord. It was very, very impressive. And the last up, we have Valerie Little. She's the assistant principal librarian at the Minnesota Orchestra. Valerie became a tenured member of the orchestra in September 2015 after serving 6 seasons as acting assistant principal librarian. Alongside her work with us, she's also an accomplished violist, performing with the Minnesota Opera, the Mill City Summer Opera, Orchestra Iowa, and at the Schubert Club. And she's also the violist for the Mill City String Quartet. Welcome, Valerie.
Hi, it's good to be here. Hi, Pinkerton. Long time no see. Yeah, thanks for being here tonight, everybody. I think outside of music, I like writing and do a lot of poetry and nonfiction writing. So that's kind of my big thing when I'm not being a librarian or a viol player.
Valerie, were you published?
Yeah, quite a bit now.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. And thank you everyone for putting your info in the chat. Looks like we have a lot of violinists, understandably. And yeah, this should be fun, and hopefully it's useful to the people that are listening. So now that we know you guys, could you sort of walk us through what we're going to go back to the before times, if you can remember what that looked like, and if you could sort of walk us through what like a week in the life would be, just so we get a sense of what this career looks like and sort of how you navigate the day to day. Could we start with Chuck, actual Chuck?
Sure. Well, in a symphony orchestra, we play anywhere. You guys can correct me if I have these numbers wrong, but I think we play usually 3 or 4 concerts a week. And unlike you might do, say, in a youth orchestra or a high school band, we will play a different program every week. And some weeks we'll play multiple programs. We might have young people's concerts or pops concerts that Sarah would conduct along with a regular classical program. So we'll have 4, maybe 4 rehearsals during a week. Monday tends to be our day off, and we'll have, a couple rehearsals on Tuesday, and same thing on Wednesday and Thursday. There might be another one, or we could do a matinee. The schedule changes. We almost always play Friday and Saturday night, sometimes on Sunday. And, so in terms of those hours, it's not that many hours, but, unlike when you're a student, you are expected to come to the rehearsal basically performance ready. So we do a lot of practicing on our own. So, I mean, just hours and hours every day, and depends on the instrument. Some instruments you can practice longer than others, like the trumpet, which is my instrument. It's hard to play 5 or 6 hours in a row like you could on the flute or the violin perhaps, but so we have to break it up, so in multiple practice sessions, but we basically practice all the time. And the best thing is that we do what we love for a living, and so we're very fortunate to have jobs like this, and they're hard won. It's not easy to find a job as a professional musician, and usually there's not just one job. So the fact that we have one main source of how we make our living is very fortunate.
Thanks, Chuck. Kate, do you want to add anything to that, sort of from the perspective of sort of a full-time orchestra member?
I think Chuck summarized a week really well in terms of, and then every week winds up having a rhythm that centers around these weekend performances. And I guess I'd say, yeah, we churn through tons of notes, a lot of repertoire. And I feel like I've gotten to play so much music over the last 20 years. It's pretty amazing. I guess one other thing I'd say, a lot of us are busy playing music elsewhere too, or we would be. Certain kind, like maybe people would play some chamber music or other kinds of ensembles. A lot of folks in the Minnesota Orchestra teach or coach youth orchestras. That's something I love to do, is coach sectionals. That's like one of my favorite things to get to do for youth orchestras or community orchestras. So there's all kinds of musical things that we might do in addition to rehearsals, concerts on stage with the Minnesota Orchestra, and then of course our practice. Like Chuck said, so much of the work goes on at home or in a practice room before you ever set foot on a stage.
Yeah, and to get some perspective, I mean, like every week is a completely different concert, right? So every week it's like minimum 3 to 4 pieces. Sometimes you're up to like 9 on like a young people's concert. There are a lot of short pieces. So every week is something different. Where, God, what's like a 40-week season or something, right? So that's a lot of music. And so to help us sort of understand, like, how many different concerts are you preparing for at the same time? Like, what's that timeline look like? That was for you, Kate, sorry.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I guess it depends on what the repertoire is. So there are some pieces of music, for example, I'll see it coming later in the season and say, my goodness gracious, we're about to play Nielsen 4. I'd better start working on that now, because that's 3 months from now. No joke. I will start really early for certain very, very hard pieces. But often in any given week, I'm working on the music that we're playing that week, and then whatever's coming on the next week. And occasionally other stuff, like for example, if you have to complete bowings, which if you're a string player, you know that we're either always playing down bow or up bow, right? Well, the principal player of the section decides which bow you're playing at any given time. So if you happen to be a principal player, or that's part of your responsibilities, you've got to get bowings in the parts weeks in advance. So if I have to do bowings for a program, it'll be 4 or 5 weeks out. So that's extra, it's advanced work, I guess I would say, that then pays some dividends down the road as you get into the week of the concert. So you have to be very aware of what's coming and manage your time well so that you're doing the projects that you really need to be doing.
Thanks, Kate. And then Valerie, we're gonna not ask you to put on your librarian hat today. We're gonna ask you to put on your string quartet / sort of playing in various other ensembles hat. And so what does that look like? So not having sort of the regular, this is the ensemble I play with every week all the time. So how does that, like, what does the regular schedule for you look like?
Well, there are groups, that's kind of like, it's complicated to piece it together, but if there's a group like my quartet, we'll plan in the summertime, we'll plan like our whole season. So we'll know we're going to play 5 programs, in October, December, 1 or 2 months apart. And then any teaching that we're doing, we would plan for those kind of things. Like if it was through an organization, then, we look at applications, like where can we apply as a quartet to like teach through Minnesota Public Radio or Schubert Club or St. Cloud Chamber Music Society, places that already have programs set up where they're looking for guest artists to come in. So that way we know about a lot of those kind of things in advance. And something like playing with an orchestra that isn't full-time, then you might get a same kind of idea. Like in the summer, you might get a contract for like Minnesota Opera where they have 5 programs during the year and we need you for these 3. And then, but you could also get called at the last minute because maybe somebody that was available becomes unavailable. That's actually the first time I played with Minnesota Opera was playing Salome by Strauss, and they called me like 3 days before the first rehearsal, and I had never played with the orchestra at all. So it was like, here's your part, see you there. So yeah, it's a really careful balance of the things that you can plan and the things that you can't plan.
Thanks, Valerie. And I think
practicing.
Always practicing. The answer for everyone is always practicing. Yeah, and I think, well, I'll ask you more about this later, but I think it's interesting also all the sort of admin work that you have to do for yourself too. Yeah, that's very, very complicated thing. And then Sarah, you're probably have the weirdest weeks out of everyone.
They're pretty weird. I mean, most conductors have more than one job. That's quite common. So I think it's a misconception that you just work with one orchestra and you're done. Most of us have multiple jobs. Some people work with our music directors in multiple orchestras. I have a position with the Minnesota Orchestra, and then I guest conduct. I was on the road 38 weeks in the 18-19 season. So that gives you an idea of how much I travel. So like Valerie, it's a sort of an issue of balancing all these administrative things that I have to do, keeping my schedule. And like an orchestral musician, I need to prepare way ahead of time for the gigs that come up and the music I have to conduct. And just as with any other musician, I need to prepare the harder stuff earlier. So I have to sort of keep a running file of what I've learned, what I need to learn, what's coming up, where there's music that I don't know, how much time I need to study it, when it needs to be done by. So it's actually a really interesting matrix that you sort of have to keep track of. And I guess the strangest part of my schedule is that I'm on the road a lot. I travel a great deal, and meeting new people, working with orchestras I've never worked with before, which I don't think people think about too much. So that's pretty interesting. And then being a conductor, there is a completely non-musical side, which is very administrative. It can be about, well, it can be artistic, it could be about programming, producing concerts. It can also be about fundraising, meeting with donors, and then just sort of more practical administrative things that you have to do as a conductor in terms of planning for your organization, for another organization, and creating concerts. So it's really a lot of things that you need to contend with and to keep track of. And it drives me crazy sometimes.
You're amazing at it though. I like, people watching this don't know, but this week has been very busy for you.
Uh-huh.
You're also conducting and hosting and playing
the harpsichord.
harpsichord all in one concert. So
Yeah.
thank you again for doing this. So now that we sort of know, right, what this looks like, I want to start asking you guys about the education path and how you get to where you are. And I forgot to mention this earlier. This was my fault. For the people watching, if you have questions throughout this, please put them in the chat as they come up. You don't have to wait till the end. We'll take them at the end, but feel free to put questions as they come up in the chat. And so for education, I sort of have one big question that I'm going to toss out to everyone. What should someone look for when they're choosing a school or a conservatory? Is it just the name? Like, is that all I'm looking for? Is it the teacher that plays my instrument that I'd be studying with? Sort of like, what should I be looking for if I'm looking at a school? Anyone want to go first on that one? Oh, this feels
I
like
can
middle
say something
school.
about that.
Thanks, Chuck.
I was always in high school. I mean, I knew early on I wanted to be a performer, and also knew that if I was able to be successful as a performer, I had figured things out that I would want to teach later on, but wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing first, but I was on that performance track. So I was very focused on the teachers that I wanted to study with. And one thing I didn't think about until my senior year is I was going to study with a guy at the Royal Conservatory, Michael Laird, who's an amazing trumpet player. And I had already been studying with who ended up being my teacher at Juilliard, Ray Mace. But I wanted to change. And then I played for him. He's like, it'd be great to have you at the school, but you're American, so you wouldn't be able to work in London. So you should really think about how difficult it is to make a living in music. And if you get out of college and you don't have a job, especially if you have to do something else to make a living until you can get a job, you might want to live somewhere that you would want to freelance, or where there might be opportunities, and the kind of city that you want to be stuck in, And I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to get stuck, I want to get stuck in New York City. So I then auditioned at three schools in New York, and also Eastman in Rochester, New York, and ended up going to Juilliard. And so I hadn't really thought about, like, I was so young, I wasn't thinking quality of life and expenses and all that. I was like, I'm just going to go into debt going into school. That's it. But it was the teacher, and then where, and and then of course there's the experience, because sometimes at bigger schools, you might not get as much experience in certain ensembles. So you want to make sure when you're auditioning for schools, it's a really good idea to have a list of questions. Go to the teacher that you would want to study with, and make sure as a student you're auditioning the teacher, because if you're paying tuition, the teacher works for you. That's the way I see it. Any students I've had at universities, I consider like I work for them to serve their needs, and ask questions like, well, what kind of ensembles would I play in? Could I, play in a string quartet? Can I play in an orchestra? Can I play in a jazz band? Things like that. So what the experience of the school is, and that way you make a decision, that's fairly informed. But you definitely, I like to follow role models in terms of playing what you want to sound like on an instrument. So you definitely, I mean, I think it's really important, especially in performance, to really like the way your teacher sounds and want to learn how to play the way they do.
Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, that was something I'd never thought of either. The whole quality of life, like the environment in which I'm going to be in, not just the city, but like the actual like school environment, like the culture of the institution, was something I hadn't considered until like I was in it. I was like, oh, this is probably, I wouldn't say like more important or as important, but it was a big thing for me. Like I ended up, not that this is about me, but I ended up transferring schools, and that helped. Yeah. My chair just broke mid notes. Anyone else want to add to that?
And some schools, like actually, just to add, because Sarah went to Curtis, which is, it's like Juilliard, but it's even more competitive because it's a smaller group. And I actually wanted another place because Philadelphia is so close to New York. I thought, well, Curtis would be really great. And I was interested in that. I knew some people that went there, but there were no openings. So some of the smaller schools, you have to know if they're openings, because there was not, I was not able to audition for Curtis because there were no openings in the trumpet studio there.
Yeah. And how much does sort of like financial aid or that sort of whole world play into it? Because I know, is it Curtis or is it NEC? One of them is
It's
free
free.
if you get in,
Mhm.
right?
Colburn
Which
is
one?
free too.
Yeah,
No, not Yale. Is Yale? No, Colburn is
I don't remember.
Yale's free for your doctorate, I think.
for
Grad
doctor.
programming.
Yeah, I mean, I think finances are a big consideration because, listen, to be honest, if you get a great degree from a great school, it doesn't mean you're going to get a great job immediately, or in 2 or 5 or 10 years. You don't know. So that's a big commitment you have to make when you're thinking about your musical education, I think. From a conductor's viewpoint, if you want to go to a school where you know that that teacher is going to have an approach that is going to jive with you, because if you don't musically see eye to eye with a conducting teacher, it's going to be a horrible 2 to 4 to 6 years. And that's really important, I think, to consider. And also, I think this holds true with all musicians, but in the industry, you're going to rely on your colleagues to tell you about job openings. In the case of conductors, you have to audition in front of an orchestra, seeing the people, not like musicians who can audition behind a screen. So you need to know the people in those orchestras, and you want to meet them in school so that you're friends with them and that you can create a network of musicians that you can rely on and have good relationships with. So these are sort of the non-musical things that I think are really important to think about, is that you create your colleagues the minute you go to conservatory.
That's true. And I'll chime in too. I felt like I learned at least as much from my peers at school as I did from my major teacher. And also the ensemble leaders that you will play with. So who is the orchestra teacher, the main orchestra instructor at the school you'll go to, if you're interested in being an orchestra musician, because you'll learn so much in that setting. There's just a lot of different things to look at. And I think transferring is not uncommon, for sure. Or if people, a lot of performers, some performers might get a job before they're out of their undergraduate, but many of us have multiple degrees. A lot of folks, go to different programs, and they often go to different schools so that they can network further and learn in a different setting. And I know after I finished my undergraduate, I knew it was a wonderful place to be, but I knew I needed to leave and I needed to go and have new challenges and experiences.
Thanks, Kate. And your answer actually segues really well into sort of my second question about education. It's like we planned it, which is, how can someone get the most out of their college experience? So like, along with the classwork and the sectionals and the lessons and all of these things, like obviously I should be attending performances. But what else, like, well, how can I get the most out of that sort of time so that I grow a lot or I can grow as a musician?
I would emphasize that attending performances can be so useful, especially like as an undergraduate. So there are some programs where there's a requirement, you have to go to a certain amount of concerts within the semester. And I mean, I'm a big supporter of that because I learned repertoire that I wouldn't have known otherwise, because I'm a viola player. I wouldn't naturally go to a tuba recital or, and nothing against that, because then I heard some good tuba playing and, or, you just you learn so much more music than you would be able to learn just in class, or playing it yourself. And then I feel like that helps you down the line, because, oh, I heard that Brahms piano quintet and I want to play that. And, it helps you plan for the future and
Yeah,
just know what playing is.
yeah, I thought the recitals thing was interesting. I remember when we had to attend recitals of, for people watching, I played the flute. So we would have to attend recitals of different instruments. And at first I thought it was a waste of time, but then after the first few, I realized that when I would hear a flute player, I would focus a lot on their technique and sort of what they're doing, and not necessarily sort of what they're musically, like what their phrasing is and what they're trying to communicate. And by having to listen to an instrument that I didn't know how to play on, right, I had to focus on that stuff, and it's like focus on communicating musically, right? And like for me, that made me like going to other recitals, but it took a while for me to sort of understand why that requirement was there.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. I still do that now, so I don't think that ever goes away. Like, I was practicing for an audition, and I had one of our horn colleagues in the orchestra listen, and his comments were so great, because he was like, I don't know anything about playing the viola. Like, I'm just telling you what I'm hearing about, just like, what is the story that you're telling, or like, does that make me, what do I notice in terms of like dynamics or phrasing or color? So I'm glad you brought that up, Mike. That's a good point.
Yeah. How about like gigging? Do you think gigging, like you should be trying to find some work like that in undergrad, or should I just be focused on learning?
I can answer this. I'd love to take this one on, because I started teaching and gigging when I had no business doing either of those things. Actually, I was like 14, but it taught me so much, to like get the book Annie thrown at me as a bass player and like, whoa, there are 6 flats and a key signature. How does that work? But you figure stuff out pretty fast. So I would encourage those of you that are on this webinar that are students, start teaching yourselves. And that seems a little maybe silly, but I remember I had some students starting when I was maybe 10th or 11th grade. I started teaching like 7th or 8th grade kids, just a couple, but it taught me a huge amount. And I guess I consider that gigging as well, because you can earn some money doing it too. And I earned some money as a high schooler playing. I started getting hired to do some like community theater and stuff. And that gave me a lot of, taught me a lot of skills, but also gave me confidence as well. And I think that's a huge part of being a musician, is like, okay, can you do the job right now? You got to do it.
Yeah.
I saw one question in the chat that I thought was a great question of figuring out what is your real interest, right? And I know for me as a high schooler, I liked a lot of different things. I did not know I was going to be a performer. My family's not musical. I had none of this in my background, but I really loved playing orchestral music the more I started doing it by the time I was about a junior in high school. And I got really excited and serious about it. But I guess I would say, if you're looking at the college level, is, you can go to a music school or a school that offers you a variety of paths. I know for me, I wound up going to a conservatory, but it had a joint degree program with Columbia University where you could have taken classes, and my mom was always telling me to do it, and I never wound up doing it. But that was laziness. But there are opportunities. And for me personally, music was something that I always loved doing. I enjoyed it and I wanted to pursue it, but it's not like I knew I was gonna do it. I didn't, but I thought, well, as long as I can do it, I'm gonna keep trying. And now here I am, and it's my job. It's sort of what happened for me.
And one of your bass colleagues started as an engineering major, right?
I know Chris Marshall did in bassoon. Let me think of who did. Oh, maybe Williamson. Yes,
Yeah.
Dave Williamson. That's right.
I didn't
Right.
know that. That's great.
Yeah,
Right.
and so some people like kind of go in, figure out that they don't like the other thing, and then kind of
Yeah,
come
a guy
back.
that I used to work with for years in Chicago, a great bass player in Chicago Symphony. He started as a pharmacist in pharmacy school, and that's what his parents really wanted him to do, you know, but his path diverged away. So it's, I also think it's important to remember, just because you're doing one thing for a period of time doesn't mean you
Mhm.
cannot shift a gear. You can make changes throughout your life, but I would try to make opportunities for yourself where you can do the things that you're really passionate about.
And people can do, multiple things. I mean, seems like the age of the Renaissance person is sort of coming back, where people are doing so many different things, like, Bill Edens, who conducts Minnesota Youth Symphonies. I mean, he's I mean, he does so many different things. He's got a brewery that he's building that raises money for music education. He's a massage therapist. He's a piano player. He's a conductor. It's just like this. I think that that culture is kind of coming back. And, I know some people. There's a guy lives in Northfield that's a pilot for Delta, but he's also a great jazz bass player. And so he gigs on the side and does gigs. He just does the gigs he wants to. He practices all the time, and he's done a lot of recordings. And so there are a lot of people that will continue playing music even if they can't make a living at it, which is the negative side of it is that it's the majority of people don't make a living doing it because it's very hard to earn a living playing music. But I'm sure all of us as performers hear so often after concerts, oh, I used to play the flute or I used to play the trumpet and I quit and I really regret it. I mean, I hear that it, like, every time I talk to someone in the audience, I hear that. And so, I mean, the great thing about what the students you're doing now in band and orchestra is, you're learning to do something where you have to listen, which is a super important life skill. You learn teamwork to work together, and you learn leadership, and then you're doing something that expresses yourself. So it's all really healthy stuff that feeds into your personal relationships, to your career choices and all of that. And you may put, what you do leads to more of the same. So you may work into that and it could develop into a career. And if it doesn't, that's okay. And that's going to be the majority of you, just statistically speaking. But that's not a bad thing. That doesn't, and I think some people translate that to mean, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to play the flute anymore. But it doesn't have to mean that. So by all means, pursue it and keep doing it. And I think the path becomes clear for different people for different reasons at different times.
Yeah, speaking of paths, I had a question specifically for Sarah, as you're sort of the only conductor here, so you have to speak on behalf of all conductors. How do you sort of make that shift once you're in school, like from instrument to conducting?
I think it really depends. My situation was really unique because I was a pianist and I injured my hands when I was 16. So I actually switched really early when I was in my late teens. I don't think that's normal. What I would say as a conductor, you do need to have mastery of at least one instrument. And I don't think it necessarily has to be an orchestral instrument, although it is important to know how all of them work and maybe even give them all a try to sort of see how sound is produced and what the issues might be. But you do need to have that really solid musical foundation and understanding what goes into practicing, preparing, the musicality and what goes into being an instrumentalist. That being said, I think people leap to conducting sometimes in college, sometimes as a post-grad kind of thing. It sort of depends when that interest hits you. And when it does, you have to kind of just, I guess, take the leap. But you do need, I know some people who have gone into conducting without a strong instrumental background. And I think they face a lot of issues because there's no sense of commonality with the people that they're leading. So you need to understand what it is that those orchestral musicians do. I think choral conducting is very different. Actually, no, you do want to have a choral background. It helps to be a choral conductor. They're just very different paths. I mean, with conducting, it's very sort of siloed in terms of what you do. You're a choral conductor, you're an opera conductor, you're an orchestra conductor. That's changing a little bit, but still it's a little bit siloed. Yeah, I don't like to talk about my experience because mine is very, very unique. I don't think most people start conducting when they're 17. It's
Okay.
usually in their 20s.
Yeah.
So it's really different.
Yeah. And I know, for example, like a lot of master's programs in conducting, you have to send in tapes of you conducting, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
as an undergrad, how do you make a tape, right? If
That's
if you're
workshop.
not already conducting.
Sure. There's like a bunch of ways. You can always get a, quartet of friends to play. That's totally fine. There are a lot of arrangements of symphonies for quartet and two pianos. I'm not kidding. There's arrangements for symphonies for two pianos. You can make a tape with any group of instruments. And I will tell you, as a person who's on the other side of watching those tapes, that it's important. We want to see your musicality. We want to see how you can uh, anticipate something that's about to happen and show it in a clear way. And you don't need an enormous orchestra to prove to us that you have those skills and that you have that knowledge and that impetus and that leadership within you. It's pretty evident even in front of a piano or two. So you can make any sort of videotape. We can tell if you have what it takes or not. So don't worry about that.
Thanks, Sarah. We are, oh, it's already 7:45. So we had saved the last 15 minutes for audience questions. So if you guys could submit your questions, if I don't see any, I'm just gonna keep going because I have a lot of questions, but I will prioritize questions that come in through the chat. So in the meantime, while people are typing up their questions, I had sort of a few, so we kind of addressed that conducting is a path. You have like a full-time orchestral musician, you have someone you can play in sort of a variety of ensembles, quartets, like non-full-time orchestras. And then also there are people that make a career as a soloist. I think that's probably the hardest statistically, right? Like it's just,
Mhm.
it's very hard. But those, to me, those seem to be the four biggest when it comes to performance, right? Like
Mhm.
excluding teaching. Am I missing anything other out of sort of the performance world other than those four?
Military bands,
Thank you.
military bands are pretty solid jobs.
Thank you.
Plus,
Yeah,
they pay off your student loans.
I did not know
Mhm.
that.
I have a student that just got a job in at West Point, and it's like all of her debt just gone. Nice job.
I have to look into that. That sounds great. Um, but so sort of taking those four, I wonder if I can sort of make each of you speak sort of for one of those groups. And so, Kate, I'm going to make you sort of the token orchestral musician for the sake of this. And I'm wondering what non-musical skills do you need to sort of thrive in this world? I mean, we ask you guys to do a lot of things like this, right? So like what non-musical skills would be helpful in a position in the
Goodness,
orchestra?
I guess I have found that a great many skills are very helpful. Most importantly, how do you relate to other people? I feel like that's just job number one, maybe for any job you have. So being a good colleague, and a lot of that for being an orchestra musician is being really well prepared, anticipating what issues might come up, stuff like that. Being very organized with your time would be something else. That's important, is an important skill set that I know I have developed slowly but surely. It's getting better. Other things that are useful is being able to, like you've said, maybe talk to donors or to talk to, certainly to talk to audience members, which I love doing. I especially love talking to kids. And this is cool that this is a webinar, but I wish that I could see you guys, because I think, yeah, one thing I'll just say too, I just miss so much being at the hall with people in the hall. It's been a tough year. So those are all, it was a bit rambly, but those are all other skills I think that in addition to the playing that are really useful and important.
Thanks, Kate. There's a question in the chat. The question is it beneficial for kids in middle school and high school to play in an orchestra or ensemble in addition to their school orchestra? Does anyone want to say no to that? Yeah, so everyone agrees. It's very good that you should do this. So for people that are local, I'm gonna plug some youth ensembles. There's GITSES, the Greater Twin Cities Youth Ensemble, and then there's MYS, the Minnesota Youth Symphonies. Those are sort of the big two in town. So if you're looking for an ensemble, they have multiple orchestras at various levels. So check those out. Maybe someone from there is on here and we'll appreciate that plug. So we sort of talked, I asked my one orchestral musician question. Valerie, I'm gonna make you sort of token gigging musician. How do you balance, so like, because you're doing administrative work, you're planning a season, you're picking dates, you're also having to balance sort of requests from multiple ensembles, and you're doing your own administrative work, right? Like you're getting the rights and all of these sort of logistics things that in a big orchestra people like us do for the performers, right? So how do you balance all of that?
Yeah, I guess a quick list of things that I thought of was in our quartet, we divide up our duties. So we just kind of decide, like, you're gonna be the contact person for this project, you're gonna do this project. I mean, we include each other on all of the correspondence, but like there's kind of a point person for each thing. I think as far as me as an individual, I want to stress in my moments here that don't ever quit a gig for a better gig. That I think the contacts that you make as a freelancer are really important. And so it's probably the most important thing, that once you meet a contractor or you meet a conductor or a section leader, and they're going to hire you, to keep those commitments, even if it's really hard sometimes to be like, oh, I want to do this really cool thing, but I already said yes to this other thing.
Yeah.
I've only seen that work out poorly for other people.
Because it's a small world. We all know each other.
Yeah. So I wanted to stress that, and to really keep, an organized schedule so that you don't double book yourself. Shoot, I had something else. I think it was just that I came from a slightly different path than my colleagues here. I went to universities for my degrees. And so for those of you that want to study like more than one thing, I double majored. I had other interests, but music was the top interest. And so I think as you're thinking about what you want to do, I would encourage you to just be like really honest with yourself and kind of weigh the pros and cons, because you're going to get a great education at a lot of different institutions, but I guess like the percentage of like who you become as a musician might be different. Not good or bad, just different. So you can, kind of think about that as you go through, especially through high school.
Thank you, Val. There's a question here. It looks like Sarah answered it while we were talking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Sarah.
No problem.
So, Chuck, can I ask you a question? Since out of everyone here, you sort of soloed the most regularly currently, to my knowledge. Could you tell us a little bit about what a soloist, sort of how that dynamic works between soloist, conductor, and like administrator, right? Like you don't get to just show up and be like, this is what I want to play. Or do you?
Well, it depends, I mean, the fun thing about a solo project is, obviously you have input. So if it's like a piece, you could have someone write a piece of music for you that suits your skill set. And so I do a lot of that just on my own, or like with a piano player or with a chamber group. But in terms of with an orchestra, which I think is what most people think of, A lot of times, soloists that travel around and will play a concerto, is, you know, the orchestra may want a certain piece, or maybe it's a big name soloist like Joshua Bell, and it's like he probably gets
Gets
to
to do whatever
say,
he wants. Yeah.
I want to play Tchaikovsky, and that's what he plays, you know. But it may, you know, but there may be, you know, conversation about it, and like, you know, Kate and everyone was saying, you know, it really is about how you relate to people. But in terms of what I do the most of is I play. I'm a soloist in a lot of pop shows, working with Sarah. With the Minnesota Orchestra. And one really great thing about the Minnesota Orchestra is how well people work together. There's such teamwork and collaboration. And so you're always invited to be part of the conversation. So it really is a collaboration. So I have come up with ideas for shows and people that I wanted to play with, like we did a show with the Steels that was really fun. And, you know, working with other artists. But you know, and Sarah and I have created shows together, you know, and we'll ask each other's advice, and you know, and that sort of leads to, you know, what I keep saying, what you do leads to more of the same, but it's really true. If you collaborate with people and come up with good shows and good ideas, it tends to lead to more of that. So, you know, just as an example, Sarah and I, Sarah had an opportunity to bring one of the shows we did here to Florida. And so we did a show with the Florida Orchestra years and years ago. And depending on how COVID goes, I may be going back to do another one there, thanks to the collaboration with Sarah. But it's not like, you know, if you go to someone and say, hey, can you give me a gig? You know, that's not the way to get a gig. You know, you share ideas and you collaborate and you come up with ideas. But it does help, especially if you're coming up with an entire program, you know, you have especially in a pop or jazz context, you know, you have a lot of things to deal with, including lighting, imagery, instrumentation, things like that. And there's a lot of there's a lot of library work, there's a lot of licensing of music, and so there's a lot of management behind the scenes that is personally completely exhausting to me. So I'm so glad that there's
Yeah.
a staff of people that
And
handle.
we will talk about that at the next panel for everyone that's excited about copyright law and all that fun stuff.
But for now, for high school students, play solos. Go to your church and tell the music director you want to play the offertory, and find a piano player you like to work with. And if you decide that you really like playing Spanish music, play Spanish music and come up with your own ideas. Or if you want to play in a rock band, you know, write your own music or play Beatles tunes if you like the Beatles. You know, that's how you get in that creative mindset. And that is also really good for development of all kinds of playing, because you get to be creative and have your own voice. And that's what I like about it. It keeps me fresh and creative when I'm playing, and it helps me play better in the orchestra as well.
Thanks, Chuck. And now to Sarah. This is something that's always sort of scared me, but about conducting, right? Like you walk on the podium, you're in front of 80 to 100 strangers. You have about 10 seconds to get them to respect you, right? And you're working with a different ensemble every week. And I mean, you have a position with us, and so you conduct here regularly, but there are places where you might conduct once and maybe that's it, or twice, right? So you don't have the time to actually build personal connections. How do you do that? Sort of just kind of.
That's a really good question. I mean,
Like,
I will say tangentially, even guest conducting, you do develop relationships with certain orchestras that you keep going back to. So you do create family that way. There's a handful of orchestras I see all the time, Dallas, Cleveland, Denmark. So, you know, that's always great to create that relationship. I would say that, you know, traveling a lot and meeting new orchestras, and I think this is true of anything that you do. It doesn't have to be conducting, doesn't have to be about music. If you show up completely prepared, knowing what you need to do and able to help everyone else do what they need to do, they don't care who you are, what you look like, where you're from, you know, the orchestra you can see, just they're going to sit back and relax because they know that you came with all your work done. And I think that's the most important thing you can do as a conductor. And the second most important thing is that it's the knowledge that we're all creating music together. You know, I happen to be the figurehead who has all the music in front of me, and I've learned it, and I can guide the orchestra through what it needs to go through. But it's a joint effort, and we need to have a collective understanding of the greater good we can create together, rather than all of us kind of having our own ideas and not wanting to get along. So I always say that a good orchestra is a microcosm of what a great society is, you know, everyone agrees to a vision. There is a leader who listens to, you know, who they're leading, and everyone moves towards a direction that creates something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And to me, that is what being a conductor is being a leader that is able to do that for an ensemble.
Yeah, and I think that's like that was beautiful, and I think part of that there's a mindset that's shifted, right? Like if you look at, I remember growing up, sort of the looking at like the Carians and like the Toscaninis and like that, like seeing them on video, right? Like that's a very different sort of style of leadership than I think what a lot of conductors. I don't think any conductor could do that today. Right.
Sarah,
And
much nicer.
Sarah is much nicer than Toscanini. Yes.
You must do it my way.
And so I think, like for me, I think it's just an interesting thing to see how, like, as society sort of shifts, like the understanding of what a leader's role is shifts, and like the orchestra is no different. There is a question in the chat, or not in the chat, in the Q&A bubble. If you want to double major in music performance and music education / conducting, is there a time in which you should choose one path, such as when you go get your doctorate degree? Does anyone want to take that?
I think I'll be happy to take it. And I think that the answer will become clear to you as you move forward on your path. So if you're in a double degree program, supposing it is education and performance, I think as you learn more about both of those fields and the work that you need to do to succeed as a student, and then ultimately into the profession of either of those fields, you'll learn more about yourself. You'll learn what you're interested in, what your capabilities are. You know, you may, I don't know, you may find like, I came to a realization I'll share with you. At some point in probably college or something, I realized like, I love playing in orchestras. I love playing in ensembles. Man, I could do that all day, but alone in a practice room, nah, you know. I realized that I was not like cool with practicing sometimes. So I started learning how to practice better, and that has served me well. But I think that that's an indication of like, you just learn things about yourself, and either you do that thing and you do it better, or you realize, hey, you know what, this is more what I'm interested in, or what I'm good at and I feel excited about.
Yeah, I had a lot of friends that like went for both, especially like being at a university. Like I had tons of friends that did education and performance in undergrad. And Kate's totally right. Like maybe they went on and did a master's in voice, or maybe they did a master's in orchestral conducting, and that kind of helped them, you know, find that path. You know, where they got to the end of some study and thought, oh, you know, I really want to be a high school choir director, or I really want to, you know, conduct a community orchestra, or, you know, and it helped them find the path that was right for them. So I don't think there's anything wrong with like keeping it open. Did we just get kicked out?
Did you? No, you're still
Oh,
here.
no, it looked weird for a minute. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was like, oh no.
On that note, we are at time. So I would like to thank all of you for watching. I would like to thank our panelists for giving us their time. Does anyone have anything that they're burning to say before I wrap up? Otherwise, I can give some concluding remarks.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't want to cut anyone off. So thank you guys again. I hope people watching that this was beneficial to you. I hope you enjoyed it, and that this shed a little bit of light on sort of like what this world is and how to get into it, and sort of helping you clarify sort of when you have all these different things that you're interested in, how to pick one and move forward. We have, again, I said this at the beginning, but for anyone that attended late, we have 2 more sessions. We have another one in March on non-performance careers. And we also have one later on how to prepare for auditions for those of you that are going to be preparing for those. And my computer is making weird noises as I'm trying to pull up the link so that I can put it in the chat. So excuse me while this jet engine goes off. And so in the chat, there's a link to all of these other sessions so that you can sign up for them. Also, please check out our concerts. We have a bunch of live streaming concerts. Sarah has been hosting all of them and she's been very gracious to do that. Thank you, Sarah. And as always, we always love doing these things with you, and we look forward to seeing you at Orchestra Hall, hopefully sometime soon. Have a good night, everyone.
Hi, good night.
Thank you.